Okay, hello, how's it going? Hope you're having a very nice day and a very nice week. Today's video is a bit different. Off the back of my Q&A video, I had a couple of questions asking like what my favourite horror game was or my favourite game in general that I've ever played. And I thought I couldn't really pick one, so what I thought I would do is to do a top 5 games I've ever played. And this one I thought I would just do top 5 any game, so like AAA game, you know, all the big ones that everyone knows and loves. And I thought I would just talk briefly about each one. It's not going to be a full review of each one because, you know, I'm sure you've seen reviews of these games already, but I just want to kind of go into a bit of why they deserve a place in my top 5. And yeah, I thought I'd just go through them with you. And if you'd like, I can do a top 5 horror games, because I know that was a couple of the questions I got in my Q&A. I could do a top 5 horror games, and there's a lot of games like indie, kind of smaller developer games that I would probably like to do a top 5 on that aren't AAA games. So let me know in the comments if you want to see a similar video like this, but on horror games and indie games. And yeah, subscribe if you're new to the channel, that would be awesome. But yeah, let's get into these top 5 AAA games, which are kind of like the highest quality, biggest budget, that have really kind of stuck with me as some of my favorite games of all time. So these aren't in any particular order, but the first one I'm going to pick, which is the first proper RPG game I ever played, was Fallout 3. I know there's an age-old debate of Fallout 3 versus Fallout New Vegas, myself and Kate being part of that debate. She prefers New Vegas, but I prefer Fallout 3. This one had the bigger impact on me. From the very start of the game, I remember when you're as a baby and you have your father voiced as Liam Neeson. I've never played a game that started like that, and it really did set the tone for the game. It doesn't put you into the game as a fully capable adult character, which I quite like. It kind of makes you feel vulnerable. You know, I like how you go from a baby to a kid up to an adult, and that's all experienced within the vault, which was an area I really enjoyed and didn't really want to leave because it felt nice and safe there. And it had its own memorable characters and fun dialogues within that before you even leave. The skill point system was so much fun to experiment with. It meant that there was a lot of variety in how you could play the game. You know, you could go for the more kind of stealth and lockpicking and hacking of the terminals, or you could just kind of focus all on combat and just be an absolute killing machine. Speaking of which, the combat was so unique with the VAT system. Yeah, obviously I'd never played anything like that. You rarely found yourself shooting manually because it kind of sucked. And plus it was very, very satisfying seeing an enemy's limbs just explode off their body. The morality system was also pretty cool. I've only ever played games as the good guy, you know, doing the good moral storyline. But with this game, as you can see, you could get pretty evil if you wanted to the nuclear extent. And I just loved how choices like that really did impact the outcome of the game. You know, the decisions you made had consequences for certain characters that you met, and ultimately in how certain storylines ended. I loved how massive a world it felt, and it was such a bleak art style for the Wastelands. I know now, compared to kind of AAA games now, the graphics might be questionable, but it really did fit the theme of the game. It was a nuclear wasteland, so it's not going to look pretty and saturated. And yeah, stepping out of that vault for the first time is one of the coolest and most overwhelming moments in a video game that I have ever had. Just the sheer scale of the world and not having a clue where to go. It's the first, like I said, it's the first big RPG game I ever played, and it will stick with me even playing Fallout New Vegas. I played a bit of Skyrim, but that one sticks with me. Okay, next up, we have a game that I only completed a week or two ago, and that is God of War Ragnarok. Now, this was an epic game, as you've probably already seen, and it had massive shoes to fill for me for the first game, and I think it met it and exceeded it by far. For me, this game built on the first game with new mechanics, new weapons, new companions to be with throughout the levels. It had more focus on playing as Atreus, which was arguably more enjoyable for me than Kratos. I love playing as Atreus, and a brilliant storyline to go with it. I felt it was more creative with its mini-bosses this time round. There wasn't as much duplication, and there were some terrifying and overpowered creatures that you had to kill in this game, but it was also very, very rewarding to do so. It also had the odd rage-worthy boss battle. Heimdall, I'm looking at you, you My favourite boss in the game had to be a giant that you fight in her own home, and the way everything was scaled made the fight feel so cool. You were absolutely tiny, and you had to hide behind pots and stuff, and it was just brilliant. And you had to destroy this bowl that she had. The acting between Atreus and Angrboda was really refreshing during their scenes, as it was one of the few times that you got to see Atreus acting more like a kid, instead of a god-killing, well, god. I also love the game's interpretations of some of the Nordic gods, like Thor and Odin. Thor was just such a far cry from the joke spieling Chris Hemsworth. He had just a lot more depth to his character. And Odin I thought was really well played by the voice actor, and there were so many times where I was just willing that he would be a really good character. And the game also put a lot more focus back on the original characters as well, Brock in particular, and he just turned into easily one of my favourite characters of the game. It also went into more detail about Kratos' backstory than it did in the first game, which I thought was really cool, the backstory with his wife, and it was so engaging. He's definitely had a lot more emotion put into him in this game compared to the first one. And the game told that story in a really captivating way, I thought. The way the God of War games just seamlessly transition from different scenes has always amazed me. No load screens, no buffering or anything, so it's just uninterrupted. By the time the credits finally rolled at the end of the game, I was just left drained of energy, but still wanting more. And yeah, it's just a fantastic storytelling game, I feel, and it definitely deserves a spot in my top 5. Okay, new day, but carrying on with the next game in my top 5, which is going to be the very first game that I owned and played on the PlayStation 5, and that is going to be Spider-Man Miles Morales. There's really not many well-made superhero video games out there, but the original Spider-Man on PS4 was amazing, and it did nearly take this spot, but I did find that Miles Morales just edged it out, partly thanks to it actually being made with the PS5 specs in mind. I also really liked Miles as a character himself. I thought it would take a lot for me to get past not playing as Peter Parker anymore, but he's still featured in the game as the mentor for Miles Morales. From the very beginning of the game, you get to experience Miles as the non-superhero average Joe, and I loved walking around the Christmas-themed streets, and it's a really nice intro with the music and everything. It was brilliant. It just reminded me of the Spider-Verse film. Like I said, the game focuses a fair amount on Miles' life away from the suit, which I really appreciated. Really enjoyed just walking around his apartment and having the mechanics similar to games like Life is Strange, where you can interact with mundane objects, only for Miles to have a line or two dialogue referencing the significance. They were usually only mundane things, but it did help paint Miles in a more human way, I thought. Onto the mechanics of the game. The web slinging was always fun. It's been fun in all the Spider-Man games all the way back to PlayStation 2. Obviously, they're much better now. But yeah, you had the two modes. You had the fidelity mode, which was 30 frames, but had like ray tracing, and the mode I chose was performance, where you had 60 frames per second, and that just made swinging around the city and Harlem just absolute joy, and that was one of my favourite things to do. Onto the combat, it was such a good system, and I really enjoyed coming up against the various enemies in the game. The usual slow-mo shots of defeating the thugs always made me feel like an absolute badass. I got a bit bored in the other game of the repetitive crimes in progress, like when there were just crimes going on and you had to chase them down from the PS4 game. But thankfully this game did add a bit more variety into the side missions. I mean, you get to rescue a lost cat, for God's sake. One of the biggest additions of Miles Morales compared to the PS4 Spider-Man game was his special ability, this bioelectricity type attack. This really added a bit more variation on the combat, reducing the amount of pure button bashing that I was doing, just punching enemies repeatedly in the face, so it really created a lot of really cool moments. Overall, I love both Spider-Man games, PS4 and Miles Morales, and an argument could be made for the PS4 version to be in this slot. However, due to the new ability that Miles Morales had, the fact that they created, focused on a completely new character and built his story up, I really appreciated, and it was made for PS5 more primarily than the PS4 one, even though they did remaster the PS4 one, so that's why I say it's a bit of a close one, so you could argue both of them. But either way, I really can't wait for Spider-Man 2 to come later on in the year, and let me know in the comments if you want to see a playthrough of that. Next game on my list, the one that I've put the most hours into, I'd say, out of all of these 5, is going to be Assassin's Creed Valhalla. To be completely transparent, I've only ever tried Assassin's Creed 1 years ago, and I didn't really like it. If you've watched my channel for a while, you'll know I'm not really a fan of stealth-based games, so safe to say that the series wasn't for me. That is until they released Assassin's Creed Valhalla, around the exact time I was fully immersed in series like Vikings and The Last Kingdom. Fun fact, the voice of Eivor, the main character in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, was a Viking himself in The Last Kingdom. I was also immersed in books like Norse mythology by Neil Gaiman, and if you like the subject, I highly recommend reading it. So with that in mind, it's easy to understand why this game is in my top 5. I think the game just did a really good job of the whole Viking dream. You start off as a Viking in Norway, kind of dreaming about distant lands west and what treasures there are, to then getting a boat and going over to the west and finding England, and then setting up a camp, and then looting and raiding England. I think it just encapsulated the kind of Viking dream very well. They didn't stop there though, as there was a fantastic storyline to go with this Viking lifestyle, allowing you to explore some brilliant areas and locations. The story follows your character Eivor's up and down relationship with your brother, but then you also get involved in the politics of the 7 different kingdoms within England, each with its own power struggles. You get to visit each one, and as well as the fun side quests that there's a main quest usually for each area that involves that kingdom's king, that you need to help them with. Now don't get me wrong, there is stealth in this game if you want to do stealth, but thankfully for me it also lets you just run on in there gung-ho and start hacking and slashing. Which brings me on to the raid part of the game. This wasn't part of the main story per se, but it was the option to loot a large village or town which would be heavily populated by soldiers. You essentially blow a horn and then you and your allies storm the town, resulting in a massive war, which I found really fun and satisfying. Like any good RPG, it has its skill tree, which is pretty good and extensive, I'd say, grouping skills together by animals. So you had Way of the Bear, which was more strength melee weapons focused, Way of the Wolf, which was more about your bow, and then Way of the Raven, which I think was to do with stealth. So yeah, there you have it, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Safe to say, firmly in one of my top 5. If I wasn't on that Vikings hype train watching the series and stuff, would I have liked it as much? Debatable, but for me, personally, the game came right time for me, and yeah, it was just fantastic, and I put a lot of hours into that game, so that certainly deserves a spot for me in my top 5. Okay, and last but by no means least in my top 5 is Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 1. Very old game, I'm going retro like with Fallout 3, but this was the first game I ever played that had clear consequence to dialogue. I think it was revolutionary when it came out, and it was Telltale's first proper game, and look how they did from there. So yeah, Telltale The Walking Dead. So this game starts you out as a convict called Lee, who is in a police car getting taken to prison. But then things unfold from there, the car crashes, and then you're left on your own, trying to fight for your own life. And then before you know it, you're looking after a little girl called Clementine, who has lost her parents and is in need of someone to look after her. And this is the point where you're no longer making choices that impact you, but now they impact her too. I played this game in my 3rd year of university with 2 of my housemates sitting behind me, along for the ride. They were by no means gamers at all, but they were completely hooked by the characters, the voice acting, the unique art style, and the sometimes devastating consequences from the decisions that you make. So I really think that's a testament to how good this game was. Whereas most of the gameplay mechanics are point and click style, the main bulk of your time is going to be spent conversing with the many different and interesting characters in the world. It's the choices you make in these dialogues that make the difference, much more so than the point and click elements. There's also some quick time button mashing events when things go south, and they can be pretty dire if you don't nail them. Throughout this game, you're going to be forced to make quick choices that aren't always black and white, and then the game forces you to live by those choices. Seriously, decisions you make early on have a direct impact on who you're left with by the end of the game. There's not an awful lot else I can say about this game other than if you haven't seen it already, to go and play it for yourselves. I know it's like 12 years old, so I know that's very unlikely. But yeah, play it for the story, play it for the characters. The mechanics are a bit meh because it is quite dated, but yeah, it's just a fantastic game. It is an episodic structure, but I think now it is all on one disc, and then there were other series to follow it. But look how well Telltale did after they made this game, so that's why it deserves a position in my top 5. And there you have it. Those are my top 5 AAA / kind of big budget games that I have ever played in my life in terms of the lasting effect they've had on me. So, you know, it's very subjective, so you may agree with some, you may disagree with some. It's very subjective, isn't it? And there may be games I've forgotten, but these are the ones that I could think of, and that's a very brief overview why. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. It's the first type of video I've made of this style, obviously. So, oh, here comes Leia. Yeah, it's the first time I've made a video like this. You know, it's been different to edit. I've quite enjoyed it, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it. Any constructive feedback would be great. And like I said at the beginning, let me know if you want me to make one on... Thanks, Leia. My top 5 horror games and my top 5 kind of more indie games that aren't as big as developers, but arguably have a better story. So I would have 5 of them. It's just whether you want to see it. So let me know in the comments. That would be greatly appreciated. And thanks a lot for watching. And yeah, like the video, and I'll see you soon.